look at the executive leadership competencies, there are, as you know from the article, if everybody has read it that Peter and I did, there's 3 generic skills, and let's get those up, Joyce. Knowledge skills, thinking skills, and action skills. And then there are 3 sub-competencies, sub-skills under each one of those. And perhaps you're familiar with these already if you've done the exercise. And so you'll see what those are. They're industry knowledge, functional knowledge, et cetera. And you can see those. And under thinking, there's the creativity and the analytic skills. And under action, there's the influence and execution skills. So these are all based on published research, which is documented below. There's actually 2 articles. We'll get to the second one in a second. But they're published originally in the National Organization Development Journal, which is called OD Practitioner, and that's noted below the conduct of due diligence. And this happened in a previous organization and a previous executive that I worked with. So important to realize, which Peter has touched on already, is that there's no such thing as a perfect leader, and there's no such thing as a perfect team. And so what we want to do is leverage the skills of each executive. What are their strengths and how can we leverage them? And also, of course, Peter mentioned this ideal skill mix changes as the organization evolves through the stages that were mentioned already. A really neat way to, let's stay there for a second. To think about this know, think, act model is in terms of ready, aim, fire. And in my experience, I'm just saying it's my experience, I find at least with American companies, there's a high degree of knowledge skills, there's a high degree of action, but there's a real need for more thinking skills. And over again, Peter and I have found this as well. I know when some of you did the exercise of putting the bars on the executive team, let's go to the next slide, please. That some of you, Claire, Michael, Chris, Ari, and Carolyn, I looked at your results and I see that you came up with very high knowledge skills and pretty good thinking skills, but the action skills were something to be desired. And that's unusual in my experience. So that could be grist for a conversation another time. Did everybody complete this exercise, by the way?
I don't know if everybody got to it, but okay. They now can go back to it if they want to go out and see it. Yeah,
you should definitely do this. And Peter and I realized that it's just a guess at this point, but being in your organizations, you have a pretty good idea of how that executive team is working. Are they firing on all cylinders or not?
I think we'll skip this poll and instead encourage you to go into the Blackboard learning system and do this exercise for yourself. I think you see what the point of this is.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see the next slide. So this slide really gives you the ideal skill mix based on research. It's 24,000 data points. That's not organizations. That's number of executives that have looked and done the due diligence process over the last 30 years. And again, this is reported in the footnote there, the conduct of due diligence. So it makes sense to go beyond the current competencies that you have that got you successful to where you are, but that's not necessarily going to get you to where you need to be. Let's just look at startup, for example. Typically, the founder and the executives have high knowledge skills, and they need to get cash in the door, so they have high execution skills. Their thinking skills is not that you don't need that, of course you do, but you don't need as much of it at this stage as you will later on. So, and if we flip in the interest of time to the end.
Let me just mention one thing here, which is this isn't really a scale. Like, it's not how much knowledge you have. It's a relative to each other. So how much do you have in one relative to what you have in another? So this is sort of a preponderance kind of a metric as opposed to a scale metrics relative to each other. I find that helpful. And you can see the mix is the ideal mix changes considerably by stage. And at the end, it depends on whether or not you're just writing it out. It would be one profile. But if you want to, like we were talking about earlier, at a large sustainable organization that is mature, realizes it needs to get this all going again and again, would have a different profile that was sort of wise up to doing that.
Peter, just a quick question. Noticing in the sustainable phase, the thinking just is, relatively speaking, much larger in proportion to the phases. Is that because that's where you're really designing all of the scalable systems, the methods that will then allow you to get to the mature phase? So there's a lot of creation in that phase, but once it's in place, you don't have to keep recreating it.
Yeah, right? I think that's a good point. And in order to avoid decline of the last stage, you're really talking about reinvention and reinvigoration of either your division or your organization as a whole. And so you're going to need those thinking skills to do that.
So in these earlier stages, your bias is for action. And it's like Brent was saying, it's almost ready, fire, aim, right? You just fire, fire, fire. And what we've talked about a few points in this program is the importance of thinking about what you're going to do. We've talked about it in terms of process last week. How do you keep people in the mode of working on the process, not just the content of what they're doing? So what are we going to do? Then you execute against what your plan was, and then you say, well, what happened? What did we learn from that? And come up with, convene a bunch of people to review all of that, come up with 3 other ways of doing it, and try again, and then repeat. That sort of thing is what's going on here in this high think mode. And up to that point, we didn't need that. But if we want to be successful in the sustainable, we got to do exactly what you described, Cameron, and then eventually we'll have a humming machine.
Yeah.
So the question that we wanted to ask you is, how does what you profiled your organization to be compare with these? So you saw that we had, in fact, several of you had high, I would call it high know, high think, but not as high as no, and then low act. So which of those, for which stage is that ideal? Anybody? Well, the answer is none. Right? It's not. Where would you want to have, high know, pretty high act, pretty high think, and low act? None of them actually. That doesn't conform to any of them. So there's data in that for you. You might want to say, well, that's interesting. I wonder if maybe we're missing something, or we want to be forcing ourselves to concentrate on maybe doing something a little differently. So you want to describe this? You want me to do this?
Yeah, just take a crack at it. So what Peter and I do is to assess an executive team. Is I do in-depth interviews. We also do the multi-rater survey, the results of which are in front of you. And this is a way of deep looking and a way of deep listening. And what the looking and listening is, it's all about the data. It's like, what is the data telling us? And here you can see, if you look to the right.
Actually, let me go to, let me go to, yeah, okay, you go ahead and take a shot at saying it here. It's this little.
Yeah, you can see the high and low scores. And so that can tell you where the learning and development plan needs to be, or where the succession needs to be, or where the replacement needs to be in terms of a person that's just not cutting it. I'm a big learning and development person. I always like to, have that be my first go-to. But there certainly are cases where that's not the, it's not going to work. So here we see a case example that was done. Again, it's in the publication that's noted. And this is pre-solution, pre-intervention. And we had a team look at the 3 basic competencies and the 9 sub-competencies. The bar that you see, the horizontal black bar, that is the level of competencies that the executive team themselves said that they thought they needed in order to move forward successfully and get market edge. So then let's take a look at the post-intervention. And you can see that most of the bars were met on the competencies. There were a few gaps there, like planning and organization under the Act. There's still quite a bit of work that's needed, although this team did raise the bar quite a bit there. This is over a 5-year period. And so pre-intervention, you can see the sales, operating income, and the market share was pretty flat. I mean, this is an organization that's not going anywhere. After the solution, the due diligence process, the multi-rater, the interviews, et cetera, the learning and development plans, and admittedly some replacement of the executive team members, here we see really dramatic changes that took place. This is a global device manufacturing company that is in Chicago. And I think it's compelling to see the post-intervention results, because that's ultimately what we're all interested in, is what difference does all this make. This is the second publication that I did. This is from the Global Organization Development Journal. And this strictly used qualitative methods. I went back after 1 year to 5 CEOs and their executive teams that I worked with the due diligence process. And I took the very statements that they said, I put them in the publication. They're all there for anybody to read if they want to. The 2 basic takeaways was the impact on the team was terrific. That the statements that I got from the VPs and the CEO were all the fact that the team itself is really firing on all cylinders much better than they were before. There was significant impact on self as well, that people engaged in an intrapersonal learning as part of the multi-rater process and the feedback. And so those were the 2 most significant takeaways.
So here's the results from one team we work with. I just want to give you one more level of detail to show you. What we would say here is that this team knows a lot, but it's short on imaginative ways to get things done. So high know, relatively lower think, and they lacked strong rollout. And then in aggregate, you get this profile summary here. So our suggestion was to focus on how to get important things done and then act. I aim, then fire. Study what worked and what didn't, review, and then what did we learn? What are the consequences of that? What are we going to do differently? Come at it again and try, and then repeat. So that was our suggestion to the team. The interesting thing is, if you look at sort of over time, you can take a reading here in 1 year and a reading in another year and see the differences. So in this case, what the team did is added functional depth and some industry depth, and gained a little bit in organization skills with 1 leader left and another 2 were brought on. They might have lost ground on analysis and creativity, but it was offset by advances in strategy and significant depth and skill accomplishment to advancement to accomplish the goals. And we still focused them on aiming before firing, and then implemented the plan, study what worked, and then repeat. And these are, I won't read these here, but these are people who have actually gone through, leaders of teams that have actually gone through this process with us, and the results that they've experienced have been phenomenal. We just wanted to share those with you.